This is Joe's guitar. Joe is my son's next door neighbor. He plays in a band, and I told him I'd fix this guitar up for him. When I got it from him, it didn't have any strings on it, and I'm going to have to refret it. Some of the frets are really dinged up. I'll get a close-up here in a minute. It's a Squier Stratocaster, and it's made in Japan, and according to the serial number, it's dated between 1984 and 1987, so it's at least 30 years old. So let's take a closer look at the frets. You can see how the frets have a lot of dings in them where the strings were pressed into them. Looks like it might need a new nut too. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and take the neck off of the guitar body and adjust the truss rod to get the neck perfectly straight. Pull the frets off and the nut out, and get ready to put new frets in it and make a new nut and take it from there. Not sure if that shows up in the camera or not, but you can see air gap there in the middle between the straight edge and the neck, and it's touching on both ends. So we want to get the neck as straight as possible when we go to do the refret, especially for crowning and leveling and crowning after we get them inserted. I've got the neck clamped into the vise here, and I'm going to go ahead and take the tuners off, and then take this, I guess you call it a string guide, off. Then we'll take the nut out. Four of these tuners are missing the little cap that goes on there. one of these screws is missing, as well as the, looks like a little plastic piece. That clamps up against the strings. Looks like it's missing also. Looks like there's a bunch of glue all around this nut here. So we'll try to take the X-Acto knife and try to make a slight cut right beside it, so hopefully I can get that nut out easy. That glue seems pretty tough. See if we can tap it out of there. Nope, just chipped it. Must be glued in there good. Well, it's coming out in pieces. Alright, we'll have to file and clean that up, get that glue off there, and work some glue under that crack there. Well, I think it looks pretty good now. That right there was a little bit of a gouge that was already in there, and there. But we'll sand that a little bit better once we get the frets out. So that'll be the next thing to do. Get the frets out and give the fretboard a little bit of a sanding before we put the new frets in. In order to make the frets come out a little easier without splintering the wood, I'm taking the X-Acto knife and just barely scraping down the edge of the fret to kind of cut any glue or varnish or anything that would be holding the fret in, that when you pull the fret it would peel back the finish or the or splinter the wood. So hopefully it'll help a little bit to minimize that. I'm going to use a soldering gun to heat up the fret a little bit to loosen any glue that might be under there. Make it a little easier to pull the fret out. I can see a little bit of sweat or something coming up around the fret as it gets hot, so let's see what it'll do. Well, that came out pretty easy. Didn't look like we did any damage or chip out, so that's a good thing. So we'll move on. There's two out. What I'm going to do now is clean up the neck and the fretboard with some naphtha. It's a solvent, but it's safe to use on finishes. A lot of people use it on guitar finishes because it doesn't harm the finish and it's a good cleaner. So we'll get some of the grime off. Next thing I'm going to do is give the fretboard a little bit of a sanding right here where the grooves are for the or slots are for the frets. It's a little bit of a raise there, so I'm going to sand it down a little bit. I've got some radius gauges here, 9.5, 10, and 12. I thought it was a 9.5 radius because that's a common radius for Stratocaster, but you see a little bit of a gap there. 10's not bad, but you still see a little bit of a gap in the middle there. But a 12-inch radius seems to fit it fairly decent. So I think I'm going to use a 12-inch radius sanding block and some 320 and go over it lightly and see how it does. And if it does okay, we'll sand it down and then go with some finer grits to polish it back up, and then we'll, once we get the frets put in, we'll oil the fretboard good. So let's give this a try. Alright, we're up to 600 grit sandpaper now. It's feeling fairly smooth. There's a few low spots here and there up here that were kind of like dented in. We're not going to get all that out. We'd have to sand too much to get all that out, so we're just going to lightly go over this is 600 here. Boy, that feels slick there, man. It's nice. So the next thing to do is clean up all the sawdust. Clean these grooves out, slots out, and then we'll have to check the depth of the slots to make sure they're deep enough for the new frets. If not, we've got a little saw that we can go in there and clean them out enough to get the right depth if we need it. Get all the gunk out of the hole or out of the slot. It's looking nice. We've got this sanded to 600 grit now. It's pretty darn smooth. I'm going to polish it up a little bit more. Super smooth. I'm checking the neck again for the straightness. As you can see some daylight in the center there, which means there's a slight bow in the neck. So I'm going to try to adjust the truss rod to take that out before we go putting our frets in. That looks pretty good right there. Now we're going to check the depth of the slots to see if they're deep enough for the tang on the fret. This part right here that goes down into the slot and grabs a hold. This is a fret depth gauge to check the slots to see if they're deep enough. This is a 10 to 14, so we use this for the radius that we have, and laying the piece of fret wire on the gauge, the tang comes just to the bottom line there. So as long as we're that deep, we're okay. We'd like to be just a little bit deeper. So we'll check all the slots now. Doesn't seem to be quite as deep on this side. The last couple slots I've checked, but it's past the bottom line, so it's kind of borderline. This helps get some of the gunk out of the slot too. That one you can see the bottom line right there, so we'll have to make that one a little bit deeper for sure. I'm going to go through and deepen the slot on most of these. I don't know if you can see that, but you can see right here at the very edge we need to go a little deeper. So I'm going to check each one again and go through with a 25 thousandths thick saw. That just fits in the slot. Concentrating mostly on each end, that's where it's the least depth. Now we're okay on this side over here. You go just a hair deeper on this side. And now we're good. Good on both ends and in the middle. So we'll check the next one. Again, on the end we're a little light. Looks like we're okay on that side over there again, and a little light on this side. And now we're good on that one. The next step is to prepare the fret wire. We'll have to run it through the fret bender to get the radius, proper radius on the wire before we cut it to approximate length. So that'll be the next thing to do, so stay tuned for part 2.